The third case to talk about is one that, again, it was a very strange case in our mind. It was a for sale by owner. So that, you know, had they used you as a realtor, none of this would have ever happened. And we can take, you know, solace in that. But what took place is buyer purchased a house. Seller in the real estate condition report disclosed as the only problem with the plumbing that there was a loose handle in the bathtub. Well, after the buyer moved in, they discovered that the sewer line between the house and the street was busted. So they sued the seller. And they sued the seller for fraud and intentional misrepresentation. These are what are called tort actions. There's, in essence, two bodies of law that you can attempt to use in collecting damages. One is called an action in the seller's position, and that is they've got to sue us on the contract or not at all. Well, fortunately, the legislature, and we were involved all the way up trying to say this, we understand the doctrine applies in commercial transactions and should not apply in residential. You know, we were on the wrong side, even though the dissent always voted us very favorably. Fortunately, the legislature did not agree, and one of the very first bills that was introduced in 2009 was a piece of legislation to undo that court case. The governor, for those of you that were at Realtor Government Day this year, actually signed that bill into law. But the aftermath is still there. A case that was just decided last month. Here we've got a real estate broker and a seller offering the property up for sale. Well, the seller had made a whole bunch of improvements into the basement. They refinished the basement. No permits. Now, the assessor didn't know anything about this. So the property did not reflect the substantial improvements that were made in the basement. The assessor learned about it through the marketing materials that the broker had out for this home. Because they saw the marketing materials and they kind of went, whoa, that doesn't match with what we got. So then they contacted the seller to come out and inspect the property, and they did. They noted the improvements. They issued a reassessment. Property on the market, seller has a real estate condition report, comes to the question about doing work without permits. Says to the broker, well, I didn't have permits for the basement. Broker said, don't worry about it. We know how to take care of it. Cool. Reassessment letter comes. The assessment has gone up just under $60,000. That's a big number. Okay, and that's going to translate into a lot more tax. The seller says to the broker, well, what should I do about this? Don't worry about it. I know how to handle this. Well, the transaction goes to close. Buyer is blissfully unaware that no permits were ever taken out, that there's this reassessment until the new tax bill comes. Okay, and then all of a sudden, the lights and the alarms and everything else start going off. So they sue. They sued the seller, of course, and the broker. Well, the broker attempted to defend by saying, you know, I'm really not part of this because I'm the agent and I stand in the shoes of the seller as the agent, and you can't sue the seller for intentional misrepresentation or fraud under this economic loss doctrine. So you can't touch me on that. And being we didn't have a contract, geez, I guess I really don't owe you any obligation. Believe it or not, the lower court agreed with the broker and said, yeah, you don't owe the buyer anything. Even though you lied to him and you helped the seller lie to him, you don't owe him anything. Went to the Court of Appeals. Fortunately, the Court of Appeals did not agree with the lower court and held broker, you've got independent duties. So even if your seller is doing bad things, you yourself can't hide behind your seller. You've got independent duties to treat this party fairly and honestly and to make disclosures. So they did, once again, cut off the economic loss doctrine in bad application. Finish on a high note. Just a couple of weeks ago, we got word of the case that we were involved in. Listing broker had the property for sale. Seller and buyer started talking. Seller called the broker, said, I'm terminating my contract. Now, fortunately, many of us in this room have perhaps either personally or knows of somebody that had that seller call, despite all your great efforts, had that seller call and say, Kevin, take your sign down, take the lockbox off, stop advertising, I'm firing you. Can they do that? Yeah, they can. I mean, they've got the power to tell you to stop being their agent. Does that mean that they can do so without any liability? No, they can't be in breach of contract. Now, what are typically going to be your remedies? Well, that's your advertising dollars, a reasonable value for your time, things of that nature. Can you sue them for the commission? Probably not. In most cases, the answer is going to be no, because the court will never anticipate that you are going to be successful. You've taken this contract on a contingent basis. You get paid if you're successful, and they won't presume that you necessarily would be. In this case, however, the buyer and seller got together shortly after the termination, entered into a contract, and the buyer acquired the property. Well, the broker sued and said, hey, I'm entitled to that commission. This deal was done prior to the seller terminating, and the only reason the seller terminated was to avoid the commission. And we became involved in this case, and the Court of Appeals, fortunately, overturned the lower court, which sided with the seller and said, you know, we just don't find that you negotiated enough, seller, with the buyer during the term of the listing, so we're not going to award the commission. But on appeal, and I think in a large part due to a brief that Debbie Conrad from our staff wrote, the Court of Appeals overturned the lower court, awarded the commission to our broker, and successfully upheld our listing contract. So that was a really, really great win for all of us in the state. It wasn't as great a win for our listing broker, unfortunately, because the seller shortly thereafter declared for bankruptcy. So there's a little issue still in the collection. But again, these are the kinds of things, there's soup to nuts, it's land use, the licensing, the practice, the contracts, and if ever you do have an opportunity, you run across a situation that you think you would be interested in, please don't hesitate to give us a call and let us know about it. If it has an impact on your business, believe me, we'll be interested. So with that, I thank you all again very, very much, and have a wonderful afternoon.